Hi dears, today we learned about the soil and their physiological properties and their types. Start with the definition of soil. What is soil? Soil, the uppermost layer of this earth's surface is called soil. But in the botany of soil, the many things are present like as the texture of the soil, the structure of the soil. In the texture, in this structure, the relative arrangement of the sand, silt, and clay particles are called the soil texture. You know that these are the three types of soil: sandy soil, silts, and clay. The particles which are abundant in the soil, like as sand, if the sand particles are more, then we call this is the sandy soil, and if the particles are sand present more, we call this is the sandy soil or silty soil or clay soil. The we distribute these the major particles of the major particles. And the next is the soil structure. The relative proportion of the sand, silt, and clay particles into the soil is called is called soil texture. Today we deeply discuss the how much these particles present and what's their distribution, and the soil texture is classified into 12 main categories of the soil. First of all, start with the sand. If the sand particles are 70% or more, we call this is the sandy soil. And loamy soil, we describe this. The particles of sand is 70 to 90%, and 30 to 50% is silty, and clay particles, we call this is loamy soil, loam sandy soil. And if the particles of 50 to 70% sandy particles and 30 to 50% is silty and clay particles, we call this is sandy loam soil. Previous is loamy sand soil, but if the particles of 50 to 70% is sand and 30 to 50% is silt and clay, we distribute this into sandy loam soil. And loam soil is 40 to 50%, 40 to 60% particles are sand, and 40 to 60% is silt and clay. We call this is loamy soil, and it's a good soil for cultivation of crops. And after this, silt loam, if the particles are 20 to 50% sand and 50 to 80% silt and clay, we call this is silt loam soil. And if the particles are 80 to 100% silt, above than 80% or 80% must present, we call this is silty soil. And the clay loam soil, we describe this is if the particles of sand is 20 to 50% and 20 to 50% silt and 30 to 60% clay, we call this is the clay loam soil. And silty loam soil is 30% to 10 to 30% sand, 30 to 60% silt, and 20 to 50% clay. We call this is silty loam soil, silty clay loam. And above than 60% clay particles present in a soil, present in a field, we call this is the clay soil. And if the particles of sand is 60, 30 to 60% and clay particles are 20 to 50%, we call this is sandy soil, sandy clay soil. And if the particles of sand is 10 to 30% and 20 to 50% silt and 30 to 60% clay particles, we call this is silty clay soil. And number 12, the peat, if the organic matter present in a soil above than more than 60%, we call this is peat soil, and it's a much better soil for the organic cultivation of the crops. because it's have a higher micronutrients and microorganisms present in a soil. You know that these are the slow and steady gave the nutrients to the crop, and it's a best choice for the farmers today because we are facing the climatic change, the changing conditions in soil, and our soils much pH here, and we reduce this to use the organic matter more into the soil and sustainable farming. Sand, we describe the sand, loam, and clay. Which one is, I'm also discuss you the which one is best for the cultivation and what's the condition of Pakistani soils. Sand, a soil with a high sand content like as 80% contents, a soil with the high sand contents like as 80% and above must be 80%, and low silt and clay particles 10% we called this is the sandy soil. And loamy soil, if the balanced mix of sand like as 40% sand and 30% silt, 30% clay particles, we classified this is the loamy soil. And the soil have a with have a high 60% clay contents, 20% silt contents, and 20% clay contents, we classified this is the clay soil. The next in next video I will try to explain the struct- texture of the soil more deeply, like as the pH of the soil, which soil pH more, and the organic what's the role of organic matter into the soil, and what's the electric conductivity, and different also the chemical properties of the soil. And thank you so much.